officials say all leads remain open after Sunday's robbery of crown jewels in the Paris Louvre Museum as they examine a vest and other equipment left behind at the scene. Meanwhile, new video appears to show a suspect calmly breaking into a glass display containing the stolen jewels.
When it comes to museums, it does not matter what government they operate on. It doesn't matter what they say. Because we know that most of these acquired pieces that they have was stolen.
Black people have lost their identity, but our oppressors have not lost our identity. This is why they chopped those noses off of the Pharaoh and the Sphinx in Egypt in the first place, is because without this nose, we can tell you this is whoever it is.
French police are still on the hunt for the crew that pulled off one of the wildest museum robberies in years at the Louvre Museum. The thieves managed to take off with 9 pieces of royal jewelry, and the whole operation lasted under 7 minutes. And all of the jewels cost millions of dollars. And there are still no arrests, no solid leads, just embarrassment for one of the most famous museums on the planet. And while the media is acting like it's the crime of the century, people like Katt Williams are looking differently at it. And trust, they are not feeling sorry for the Louvre, because that same museum has spent centuries showing off art and artifacts stolen from Black history. So let's break down how the heist went down, what Katt had to say, and why this whole situation hits way deeper than just a jewelry robbery.
These artifacts, who do they belong to? They belong to the museums where they are now.
Now, that's what you call colonial thinking. The very idea that you own what you looted because you looted it.
It was looting, yes, but there were laws. The looting of war was legal.
All right, so here's what went down. It was a regular Sunday morning at the Louvre when 4 people pulled up dressed like construction workers. They rolled up in a truck with one of those lift ladders and parked it right outside a side entrance of the museum. And within minutes, they're up on the 2nd floor, right inside the section holding the French crown jewels. These thieves moved fast. They hit the glass cases with angle grinders, scratched 9 pieces, and dipped, all in less than 7 minutes.
Police say 4 men disguised as construction workers broke into the Louvre using this mobile elevator before making off with priceless pieces of France's crown jewels.
This is the heist of the decade, you know, targeting the Louvre, the world's most famous museum. It's as bad as it gets, especially for France, but also for the entire world.
Police are investigating this image from a video obtained by BFM TV, which they believe shows one suspect trying to access.
The suspects took off with at least 9 pieces of jewelry, including diamond tiaras, emerald necklaces, brooches that once belonged to French royalty, and even the crown of Empress Eugenie, wife of Napoleon III. So it's not just expensive jewelry. This stuff is literally part of France's so-called national heritage.
Priceless items, including sets of sapphire and emerald necklaces and earrings, elaborate diamond brooches, 2 diadems, and Napoleon's wife, Empress Eugenie's diamond-encrusted golden crown, nearly 200 years old.
After snatching the jewels, the thieves left on scooters and disappeared into the streets of Paris. And all that was left behind was some tools, the lift truck, and a whole lot of confusion. The wild part is that they even tried to burn the truck before leaving, but a museum worker stopped it before it went up in flames. The whole thing feels like something out of a movie, except it's real life, and the Louvre got played. Now, the French government's scrambled. The museum shut down for days, and officials are calling it a national embarrassment. The culture minister is talking about tightening security, and people are already comparing it to the old days of big art heists, like the Gardner Museum robbery or the Mona Lisa theft back in 1911.
We arrived immediately a few minutes after receiving information about this theft. And to tell you everything, this operation lasted almost 4 minutes. It was very quick. It must be said that these are professionals. Organized crime today targets art objects, and museums have obviously become targets because France, as you know, is a country with a rich heritage, a country with historical heritage objects of great value. And so these museums have also become targets for these criminals.
But this time, it's not just about missing jewels. It's about what those jewels represent. And that's exactly where Katt Williams comes in. So after the news broke, Katt jumped in with one of those takes that only Katt could deliver. And he's basically saying, I'm not losing sleep over the Louvre. And if you know Katt, that's not just him being petty. That's him making a point. He's reminding folks that European museums like the Louvre have been holding on to stolen art for centuries. They've got African masks, statues, gold, and spiritual artifacts that were stolen during colonization. And now they're sitting behind glass, treated like trophies. And when West African countries asked for their artifacts back, European museums told them the best they could do was loan them some of the pieces temporarily.
Neither is it news that during colonial rule in Africa, thousands of cultural artifacts were stolen. While some African countries have been asking for the return of their artifacts, major museums across Europe have only agreed to loan some back, while a few others have returned maybe one or two in recent times. Now, France, surprise, surprise, has actually been reported to call for thousands of African art in its museums to be returned to the continent. Only time will tell if France is not just talking the talk, but will actually follow up by walking the walk.
And according to Katt, this is all part of the colonizers' attempt to rewrite history. Katt's whole point is that the best way to convince an entire region that they have no history is by either destroying or rebranding everything that defined their history.
You probably wonder, why do white people pay so much attention to black people if they don't like them? You would think if you didn't like something, why would you be paying attention to it? I don't pay attention to things I don't like. Black people have lost their identity, but our oppressors have not lost our identity. That's just why they chopped those noses off of the Pharaoh and the Sphinx in Egypt in the first place, is because without this nose, we can tell you this is whoever it is. But with that nose, it can only be. Why would somebody vandalize a whole face and only vandalize one part? Nobody wanted to knock an eye off or take an ear off or no chins missing. No, just the nose. Because it's a brand.
So now they're treating the Louvre robbery like it's a national emergency. But Katt is saying, don't ask me to be mad because somebody finally robbed the robbers. And it looks like a lot of people online agree with him. Because when you really think about it, the Louvre crying over missing jewels sounds kind of ironic when half of their collection came from somebody else's homeland. And to really get why Katt said what he said, you have to understand the story behind it. Because this isn't just about one famous museum getting robbed. It's about a system that's been robbing everyone else for centuries. Let's start with the Benin bronzes. Easily one of the most famous cases of cultural theft in history. In 1897, British soldiers stormed the Kingdom of Benin, burning the royal palace to the ground and stealing everything they could carry. I'm talking about thousands of bronze and ivory pieces, royal plaques, sculptures, ceremonial masks, all created by African artists hundreds of years before Europe even had electricity. They were spiritual, political, royal documents, and they were all auctioned off to museums and private collectors across Europe. Some ended up in Paris, and a lot still sits in London and Berlin.
These reliefs that so disturbed the Victorians are the Benin bronzes. They're now regarded as one of Africa's greatest treasures. Created from the 16th century onwards in the ancient West African kingdom, they record Benin's great kings, her wealth, her military power, and the history that Africans were supposed to lack. The Benin bronzes came to Britain as the spoils of an act of plunder. In 1897, British colonial forces attacked Benin City. It was an act of revenge for the ambush of an earlier British expedition. They deposed the king, the Oba, or Vanuamwen, sent him into exile, and burned his palace to the ground. They looted the brass plaques and statues that once decorated the palace walls, took them back to London, and sold them off. Some were put on display in the British Museum.
And then, of course, there's Egypt. Half of the stuff Europeans love to call classical art, those mummies, stone coffins, gold death masks, they didn't stay in Egypt. The French and British looted it during their colonial adventures, sometimes under the excuse of science, sometimes just plain theft. Napoleon's troops literally took artifacts straight out of tombs during his Egypt campaign in the 1790s. That's how France acquired so much of what you now see in the Louvre's Egyptian antiques section. And it wasn't just Egypt or Benin. France took cultural treasures from all across its former colonies: Senegal, Mali, Chad, Madagascar, Algeria. Some of that art still sits in the Louvre, while the rest is at the Quai Branly Museum in Paris, which is basically the warehouse of colonial trophies. That museum alone has over 70,000 pieces from sub-Saharan Africa. 70,000.
And when they say we have no art, they forget that they have stolen all of them, and they are to be found in the museums in Europe. If we had no culture and if we could not do the thing they say we could not do, why were they plundering the things that they plundered? Why? Because we had a culture, and what you do is that you destroy a people's culture, and then you create another culture and make them think like you want them to think. This is what they did, not only to us who remained in the mother continent, they did it even to our brothers and sisters who are taken to the Caribbean, those who are taken to the Northern America, those who went to Southern America. They did it, and they took away our language. And if you doubt me, I want you to watch Alex Haley's Roots and see how the main character, Kunta Kinte, was beaten that he may abandon his name and acquire a new culture. But those who have a culture and those who believe in it will never abandon it.
And it's not just France and England either. Belgium's Royal Museum for Central Africa is another example. Most of its collection came straight out of the Congo during King Leopold II's reign, a period where millions of Africans died under Belgian rule. They have masks, carvings, jewelry, tools, all displayed like curiosities, while the people who made them were treated like property.
The museum, full of artifacts and stuffed wildlife, was often criticized for ignoring the brutalities of King Leopold II's fiefdom, whose troops collected the hands of those who resisted slave labor at a time when millions of Congolese people are estimated to have died.
And when African nations started asking for their stuff back, Europe started stalling. France's President Macron made a big speech in 2017 promising to return stolen African art, and he called it his top priority. He even commissioned a report that found 90% of Africa's cultural heritage is actually outside of the continent, sitting in Western museums and private collections. But fast forward to now, and only a handful of pieces have actually been returned. So yeah, when Katt Williams says he's not crying for the Louvre, it's because this is the same museum system that's been holding onto stolen goods for generations. The difference is, this time, they're the ones getting robbed. And what makes it even wilder is how they spin it. When Europe steals, it's preservation. When Africa wants it back, it's complicated. But when somebody hits the Louvre, suddenly it's a national tragedy. And look, I'm not saying the robbery is justice, but it sure doesn't make me feel bad for France either. The Louvre, the British Museum, the Vatican, all these so-called temples of world culture are filled with stolen goods, literal evidence of colonization turned into tourist attractions. The arrogance of taking something sacred, slapping a label on it, and acting like you're doing the world a favor. It's the same energy that had colonizers saying they were bringing civilization to the places they were actually pillaging. And the double standard is insane. Just look at how the media covered this Louvre robbery. Every news channel is calling it a devastating cultural loss for France. But you rarely see that same empathy when African nations ask for their ancestors' treasures back. When Nigeria asked for the Benin bronzes, Britain said, "We'll loan them to you." Loan? Imagine being asked to borrow your own stolen property. And now the same countries that built their museums on colonization act like the victims when someone dares to touch their treasures. Also, this forces a conversation that most people avoid. Who owns history? Because if 9 missing jewels can cause a national meltdown, what does that say about the millions of African artifacts taken and never returned? Anyway, that's where I'm leaving it. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. Should Europe finally start giving back what it stole? Or will it take more moments like this before they really get the message? Drop your thoughts below, and I'll catch you in the next video.